God damn it, you accursed. Welcome to the very last Curse of Politics podcast of 2021. Yes, you're welcome. We're taking next week off to recharge and reflect on our miserable lives, well, that's Scott in particular, and the political events of the last year, so we can come back full of energy, insight, and some brand new creative ways to cuss in 2022. Here with me are those body truth tellers, Jenni Byrne and Scott Reid. This week on the show, a year-ender. A year-ender. That's right, a goddamned raucous year in review as only Curse of Politics could do. The best and worst of everything. As always, we'll end with our final Hey Yous of 2021. So, this is not a quiz show. This is the real life. Scott, Jenni, how are you this morning?
Great.
Christmas is coming, as you've already hinted at. Nothing makes me less happy than joy, so I'll be pleased when all this goddamn Yuletiding is over with and we can get back to remembering how uncomfortable we are around our families and so forth. So, but I'll persevere.
Jenni, where are you going for Christmas? What's going on?
I am going to, for Christmas Day, I'll be in Ottawa. I'll be at my sister's. So, either on the front end or back end, I'll head to Fenland and visit Dad and Bonnie.
Right.
And then I'm going to go to Florida.
And I will be in your backyard with a bottle of Jack Baker's Top Secret Rye, which when I was a boy was the cheapest rye you could find. My dad would send me to the liquor store where they knew me by name, and I would pick him up a little bit of Jack Baker. And that was our Christmas joy.
It's funny that when we were younger, even our generation, we could, and you're a little bit older, but we could actually go and do that. Like I would be sent to Becker's for my grandfather, and I'd buy. They'd get the cigarettes they knew he wanted, and then I'd get a can of sardines, and that was like that was my trip to Becker's, and then the change I got to spend on candy.
On Station Street in Belleville, Ontario, there was a guy's place, Cooner Day. Cooner Day, we called him Cooney. He had a little tailor shop. Well, it pretended to be a tailor shop. Really, it was like basically a mini Legion. It was just like buddies of his, including my old man, would sit around there and day drink. And there was a liquor store about a block away. And I would literally go in with the old slips, and I would go in and I had a number memorized. I'd say, it's this number. And then sure enough, the Jack Baker Top Secret Rye would come out. I'd walk home, and then there was a laundromat next door, and I could go over there with change and get sweets. So, I mean, it was a well-rounded youth, and I was, I got to pick up skills. So, all good.
All right. Well, while you guys head to Warmth, I'm heading. Look out, Regina! I'm heading there tomorrow.
Woo!
Nice.
Yeah. Hopefully armed with rapid tests, so that I can circulate freely and confidently among the population, but I'm waiting for them in the mail, and hopefully they come today. My rapid test. I've not been participating in the Hunger Games exercise of trying to get them from the liquor store.
Well, I went and got a rapid test at a private clinic yesterday, and it took me less than 5 minutes to get tested, and I got my results in 20. So there are options out there. There are options out there for people that have the ability to spend a bit of money. Okay.
Now, I was hoping to have some to carry around with me before I went into events and stuff like that, but we'll see how that goes. All right, listen. So it's been a year. We had a hell of a year. Curse of Politics with our daily thing during the election. Had a lot of fun, and we have chronicled this whole year, and now we're going to try to sum it up.
Chronicled. You make it sound very academic. We've chronicled. We've put the year to song, people. We've one of those grand visionary Gordon Lightfoot Canadian Railroad trilogy songs. We've chronicled the journey of Canada in 2021. Hey, there we go.
Yeah.
Live there we go. There's my Gordo Lightfoot shirt from Massey Hall. And I guess I'm glad I saw that. Okay. So let's. You were there too, Jenni.
I was.
Let's start with the very top. Let's give out the Hart Trophy right off the bat. Most valuable player in Canadian politics in 2021. Jenni.
I am going to go with Premier Francois Legault. I think that he is a politician above all politicians right now in the country. He has been able to weather the very severe lockdowns that Quebec has had and stayed very high in the polls. He is heading into an election period. He's in the 1-year cycle, October 3rd. He remains extremely popular in the polls. As we've talked about, I personally think Bill 21 is egregious, but he has the support of Francophone voters from voters in Quebec at astronomical numbers in that. And he's ruthlessly political, and I say that in a very complimentary way. This is a province that actually did away with their traditional speech from the throne. So on mid-October, when they kicked off their final session, the LG read some very brief remarks, and it was followed with an hour and 14-minute visionary speech by Legault in the National Assembly. And so I think that more so than any other political player in the country, I think he is the most valuable player for the CAQ.
Jenni, that's a really great answer. I mean, the guy seemingly has some relationship. Like, they had way worse COVID results than Ontario. And he's super popular and applauded for his handling of COVID compared to the grief that Ford gets in Ontario about the handling of COVID. He seems to have been able to bring everybody along on Bill 21. And I mean, you know, with his reputation intact. And a lot of people think he's got a negative long-term agenda for the country. He's a guy to watch, and he's very powerful, no doubt about it.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk that kind of Bill 21 in the next election is just a precursor to another referendum question in Quebec.
I know, I get a migraine just thinking about it. I'll just add my 2 cents on that one before even taking my pick, because I also think it's a great choice, because the guy I think he is for sure the most important player in Canadian politics almost right now, because of this sort of hegemonic position he's established for himself. I mean, he's literally wiping out his opposition. They're not competitive. I think it's a reminder that when politicians really overwhelm the landscape, it's usually not because of an issue, it's because of culture, right? Like, I mean, if you think about the politics of culture and how it's taken hold and what it's doing in terms of the United States, like, what's the resilience of the Trump guys and all that stuff, right? It's that they campaign on culture and they connect. And like your guy, Chris Anand, was saying and stuff, and people's failure to understand that and understand, I think is really important. And I think that's what Legault in his very own way in the province of Quebec has got a culture thing, which is that he represents Francophone Quebec in a way that Francophone Quebecers think that he's got their interests and will defend their interests. And it makes him very powerful, and as a consequence, maybe, very anxiety inducing, because you feel like the guy could put his finger on some buttons.
Well, I mean, when you look at who's voting for him, just think of this fact. If the election was today, the Parti Québécois would not elect a member of the legislature.
Yeah.
So where have those voters gone?
And I don't think his game plan, and who knows? I mean, the people who know more about Quebec literally could fill the Pacific Ocean more than me. But I'm not convinced that a referendum is his play. I think that he is creating a de facto separation, right? Where it's sort of like, sorry, I'm not asking permission. So fuck you. I'm not asking permission. I'm just literally kind of culturally, politically, institutionally, I'm more or less starting to just separate from Canada. We'll benefit financially from the transactions, but we are going to be very much our own distinct thing. And that extends to something like Bill 21, where, he's aided by the objection of those of us in English Canada by it. So it's almost like, how do you fight that? How do you fight a guy like that who turns your sword into his shield? So it's scary. My MVP.
Go.
My MVP.
Go.
Trudeau. And I mean, it's a weird choice, but I kind of came to this conclusion. I like your pick a lot, Jenni, but I landed on Trudeau finally because I sort of say to myself, I don't know that you could have designed a weaker start to a campaign, a more feckless effort. It really, really, really looked gruesome in those first 2.5 weeks. And just and yes, the opposition parties made mistakes, and we'll come to that. But ultimately, you're like, even playing his lowest brand of ball, right? Even with broken skates or whatever was wrong with him in that first 2-3 weeks, the guy's still able to actually score an almost majority outcome. And it just is a reminder that, his political brand and the resilience, he is a guy who can throw the party on his back and campaign over the line. And so I think you sort of look at it and you can say a lot of things about this election, but I think you have to come to the conclusion. It's like, wow, man, that guy is, durable. That's why I picked him.
Yeah. I looked at the election, Scott, and I had a completely different take. And it leads to my MVP of the year, which is the Liberal brand, the LPC brand. Because I think you had an election in which in which none of the leaders were inspiring people to vote for them. And all of them were diminishing in reputation as the campaign went along. And ultimately, I think people felt they were most comfortable with the Liberal Party in office in these circumstances. And now I don't think they're entirely in conflict, because I don't discount Mr. Trudeau's role in the creation of that brand and in the development of that brand that had that strength. But I think in the end, people were voting Liberal more than they were voting Trudeau. And while Trudeau unquestionably in 2015 put the party on his back and carried it to victory, and in some respects in 2019 had that capacity still, I actually don't think he has that capacity anymore. And I don't think that I don't think the election turnaround was due. I mean, he looks like a wonderful campaigner. He does, all of us who've worked for candidates wish that we had a candidate that can go out there and deliver a line as crisply and clearly as he can, that can emote it as well, and has the energy that he has on the campaign trail. All that stuff looks tremendous. I just think the connection's gone.
Can I ask you guys both a question? Just following up on that, because I think this is an interesting thought. By the way, this whole brand thing I want to come to later in one of our other things I've got to note. But so this goofy what if game then. Here's a goofy what if question for you both. So let's take your premise, David, which is that it was overwhelmingly people just settled, well, I'll go to the comfortable brand, that's LPC. Does that mean that if Trudeau hadn't been the leader, that if anybody else that's on the political stage right now with the letter L beside their name, that they would have had the same result? Because to me, that's where I can't imagine that the party would have won the election without him, and it still would have had the brand. But am I wrong?
Jenni, what do you think?
I kind of agree with you both. I think that Trudeau is a unicorn candidate, that he's a celebrity candidate. It's in the same vein as Barack Obama. People look at him in such a different way than any other candidate that has come before him and probably follows in our lifetime. He's a genuine, somewhat celebrity. I also think you guys are blessed, though, with having the most resilient, strong political brand in the Western world. I think the Liberal Party of Canada and ergo, especially the Liberal Party of Ontario, benefit tremendously from that brand. So I agree with both of you.
In an effort to be both relevant and constructive, two things that are always at the top of my list of life goals, along with one day owning a pair of Elton John's platform boots circa 1973, we've been talking about giving season. We're now deep in the throes of giving season, which is to say, there's a whole lot of giving going on. The good people who present our show, TELUS, operate their company with social purpose. For TELUS, giving is a core value, 365 days a year. In fact, they've been called the most giving company, having contributed over $1.2 billion to charitable organizations in Canada. Here's the thing. TELUS wants to give more, and they need your help to do it. And so they're putting out this challenge to all of you generous and influential hurly-burlyites. This year, as you reach out to your local charitable and community organizations, shelters, senior centers, women's and children's charities, and the like, if you could please let them know that TELUS has a number of giving programs that can help so many vulnerable Canadians get connected to technology. Last week, we talked about mobility for good. This week, I want to tell you about Internet for Good. Internet for Good provides lowest cost internet to families in need, youth aging out of care, low-income seniors, and people on disability assistance so they can reach their full potential. It's pretty clear how important these programs are for vulnerable Canadians, Herle Burleites. So TELUS really wants you to take up the challenge and spread the word. Help make sure the organizations you support know there are programs to support their clients. Because when technology becomes more equal for us all, the country is just so much better off. To find out more, go to telus.com/connecting Canada. Okay, what was the best, the smartest political move of 2021? The tactic or strategy that most made a difference? Scott, do you want to start?
Sure. I chose the Conservatives' decision to release their platform on like the first or second day of the campaign, whatever it was, first, depending on how you count it. I just thought that we did watch a circumstance where the Conservatives could have won the election. And there's a lot of like going back and forth now, and it will inform the debate that the party's going to have. But I think that the election could have been won. And I think the election was there for the Conservatives. And I think one of the ways they put themselves in a position to get there was that in contrast to the sort of nothing that the Liberals offered up in the first 2.5, 3 weeks, the Conservatives, by putting their platform out immediately, established the frame, gave themselves something to talk about, gave themselves something to run on, didn't just have to campaign on personality and appearance, and it dominated the discussion. It drove the campaign for almost 2 weeks. Now, they also placed in there some of the seeds of their future problems and failed to handle all those things. But as a first chapter in the election, releasing that platform really dominated and dictated the shape of the campaign. And it might have helped them win if they hadn't fucked up the second act.
Jenny, why don't we shuffle up the order and I'll go next?
I would love that, because I'll be honest with you, this was the hardest category I had, because I think this year was devoid of any good political decisions.
And the winner is Mario Tremblay.
I say the best move was, and Scott, your answer was good. I think the best move was the Liberal pivot to guns in the middle of the election campaign to blunt the Conservative momentum. They took a hanging Chad in the Conservative platform and turned it into a big thing that in a campaign that was about nothing became about that for a few days. And they produced very compelling advertising. And I think all the evidence is that the Conservative momentum stopped around that time, allowed the Liberals to regroup and have a strong second half of the campaign. So I think that was a pivot point in the campaign, and it was clever of the Liberals to pick up on that and to turn it into the issue that they turned it into.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I was actually going to say that it was the absolute TSN turning point. Not just the fact that they jumped on it, but it was almost the reaction that the Conservatives had that made it even better. Like they were the handling of it was an absolute gift to the Liberals. I think I'm going to say from a purely political now, from a Conservative point of view, I think the best political move and one of the only good ones that Aaron has done this year is probably putting Pierre Poilievre back in as finance critic. With all due respect to Ed Fast for the time that he held it, Pierre is just at a different level than anyone else in that caucus, including Aaron, in terms of pushing on the Liberals in terms of the economy. He's done a great job against Freeland in question period, even better in committee. She was woefully unprepared, as were her officials, in two back-to-back meetings, and he's also able to get under the skin of the Liberals so bad, and he's so underestimated by members of the media and the Liberals. That's why he does get under their skin. Let's be honest. Everyone was mocking the just inflation, but he actually goaded the Prime Minister into actually saying that himself. Like, it's a perfect, TV ad clip. And so I think in a year where there were very few good political moves made, I think from a Conservative point of view, that was a good one.
All right. Biggest political mistake of the year. I'll start. The campaign, I thought, as probably most campaigns are, but I thought the campaign was full of mistakes. I thought the government called it at the wrong time. I thought they had a terrible rationale for calling it when they called it. I think the NDP campaign was wrong-headed from start to finish. But ultimately, I think the biggest political, we didn't even touch on the Greens, I think the biggest political mistake of the year, because the consequences were so high, was O'Toole and the Conservative Party missing the zeitgeist on vaccines in the election campaign. I think that's ultimately what cost them the election campaign. It turns out the thing was very close, closer nationally than we thought, closer in Ontario than we thought. And there was a real chance to win it, and it slipped away probably in the last week. And the issues in Alberta around COVID, and Jason Kenney probably had something to do with that, but the Conservatives did nothing to, not to make a pun, inoculate themselves against that rising anxiety as we approach the end of the campaign again. And I think that had they been more in the mainstream on vaccines, they might have won the election.
Well, I'll quickly go, because I agree with you to a certain extent. I think the single biggest political mistake of the year was the Liberals not calling the election sooner. We were talking about this from June onwards, and I remember like every pod we did in July, we're like, why aren't they calling it? It's not going to get like, these are like, they're in a perfect, like dream circumstances. And yet they waited basically 2 months from when they could have called the election, at least a month and a half from calling the election. And then when they called it, because I think people automatically assumed
they weren't ready.
They were ready. They seemingly like I kind of assumed that the month and a half that they kind of dragged their heels was this, there was going to be a huge platform and some signature items and like a well-planned tour. And it was anything but. And so I think that was the single biggest issue. I think if they had called the election even a month earlier in July, he would have won his majority.
Okay, well, we can make quick work of this because you guys, you guys have literally talked. All the options that I considered have already been discussed already. So, like, you know, I had all my. No, I'm not even joking, right? So maybe that just makes us boring, but or maybe it means that there's a consensus of uniform view here. But like Conservatives and mismanaging guns for 5 days, to me, like, you know, if you're defending something for 5 days, then you're fucked, right? The Conservatives on vaccines, I couldn't agree with you more, David. I think they just, and it wouldn't have taken a huge positioning change, but they weren't willing to go there. But I'm with Jenny. Like the where I landed ultimately was not calling the election earlier. I think that 4 weeks would have made the difference with the majority. I'm in 100% agreement with Jenny. By the way, everyone disagrees with us, eh? Like, if you hear people, they all like go, "Oh, no, the election told you that it was inappropriate to call the election, and they called it, that drives me nuts. I've had that argument over the course of the past year.
Well, they can say that, but we know for a fact they're wrong.
That's right, because we believe something different. There you go. You're wrong.
And maybe we don't have a vested interest in rationalizing a bad decision. Well, the lower mainland of British Columbia is no longer cut off from the rest of Canada. Washed out roads and rail links in the province's interior have been largely re-established. And the story of BC's worst flooding in modern history is already fading from newscasts and front pages. But of course, for British Columbians who've suffered through remarkably severe weather this year, let's not forget that the same area was burned by some of the hottest temperatures on Earth just 6 months ago. The disaster continues. BC's Deputy Premier, with great understatement, has said that the scope of the damage inflicted by repeated atmospheric rivers was extraordinary. Our sponsor, CN, has been at the heart of the relief efforts and can vouch for that. The railway has donated $100,000 to the Red Cross. CN sent more than 400 people into the region when the floods hit, and they've been working 24/7 since. They've helped rescue stranded residents. They've ferried healthcare workers to isolated areas. They've delivered medical equipment. Oh, and they've also done some serious engineering. CN had 58 track outages spread across 245 kilometers. All are now passable. In the process, CN employees used 110 pieces of heavy equipment to move 282,000 cubic yards of rock and earth and sludge. The fact is, CN is part of the communities its tracks run through. The people who live in those towns and cities are its neighbors. A lot of CN's employees in British Columbia make their homes in the interior. In any case, news headlines might fade, but CN will not. It will be there working side by side with British Columbians until the cleanup is done. BC can count on it. So, comeback of the year in Canadian politics. Scott, go first.
I don't think there's any debate over this. I don't know how you could come up with a different Jolie. I mean, Marc Garneau is just like thrown in the snowbank. I don't even know where he is. Like, I thought he was supposed to be getting this diplomatic appointment. He hasn't gotten that. I don't know what's going on, right? It was just kind of like, listen, dude, just make it. She says she wants it, so you just gotta go in the corner. She comes back. She's co-chair of the campaign. She gets appointed foreign affairs minister. People now talk about her routinely that if Trudeau does leave, that she's positioning herself to make a run as a federal leader. And she was a punchline 2 years ago. So whatever combination of competence, political management, small p political management behind the scenes, she has pulled a full-fledged phoenix within the party and within her position within the party in this government, and it's something to watch.
That's unquestionably true. Hey, wait, just one question about that though. If they weren't going to put Garneau back in the cabinet, why'd they let him run? Like, it's a riding you could get a
We've
star
talked about
candidate.
this, right? Don't you think that so something happened post-election? Like, I mean, it was that window, right? It was like it had to be. Otherwise, your point is exactly it.
And by the way, Garneau was one of the first MPs out very critical of Bill 21 when this whole debate started in the last month. I agree with you on Jolie. She's not my pick, but I do agree with you. This is not talking about what I think in terms of her competency as the foreign minister, whether she is a serious or credible leadership candidate, but. I do like to see in politics when people are rewarded for going out and fighting for the cause and fighting for their boss. It's nice to see that she did step up to the plate. She did some heavy lifting. She was willing to go on the attack. And so from a purely political, nonpartisan way, I like to see when people like that, people that are willing to do that are rewarded. My biggest comeback is actually not as a person. I think the biggest comeback of the year, and this is good for the country overall, is Alberta's economy. And so regardless of what people want to say about Jason, and I quite like Jason, right now, like if you look at the last the statement that she gave, that Freeland gave last week, a huge attribution to that was revenue out of the oil sands. They're predicting that for the remainder of the year, oil stays at $77 a barrel, then would go down to $66 a barrel. Jason has established Calgary as a tech hub. There's been more oil produced, shipped and sold than ever in Alberta's history. And they could be in a position to be one of the only provinces or governments to be able to balance their books sometime in the next year. And so I give Alberta's economy, which is better now than what it was pre-COVID. I give them the biggest political comeback of the year.
Great. That's certainly good news. So those are both good choices. And my comeback of the year, kind of related, Jenny, my comeback of the year is Rachel Notley. Rachel Notley, surprising winner of the previous election, one term, drummed out of office in a big way. It seemed inevitable that Alberta was reverting to its conservative roots. NDP go back to being a minor party in Alberta. She doesn't quit. She sticks around. She fights it out. She uses her credibility as premier. And now she's 10, 12 points up in the polls and looking like she's the odds-on favorite to be the next premier. And that's the kind of thing that rarely happens in Canadian politics. And I think it's the comeback of the year.
Listen, and she's very relatable. Like she comes across as very likable and kind of the people. Like I know there were a lot of people, some people, she tweeted something out this weekend that she was at a pub in, I think it was Edmonton, and she had like a bucket of bacon, and people are like, oh, she looks terrible in this picture and all this kind of stuff. All I cared about was I figured out what the restaurant was and went on the menu because I wanted to see if they actually had a bucket of bacon on the menu. And
what a great idea. What a great idea.
You get a bucket of bacon and it comes with like a maple syrup dipping sauce.
Bucket of bacon. Why doesn't every restaurant have that on the menu?
Exactly. A bucket of bacon.
All right. Biggest disappointment. What was your biggest disappointment of the year, Jenni, in Canadian politics?
Every time I walk past the mirror, I'm crestfallen.
I listen. I can't help but say the Conservative Party. Obviously, Aaron O'Toole. The fact that we ran such a liberal, non-centered campaign. I give him credit. There was a strategy, but it was completely opposite from what the Conservative voter coalition is. I'm not saying that coalitions don't evolve, but it was completely going after a segment of the population that were never going to vote for us or not going to vote for us now. And the fact that he pivoted so hard on the carbon tax, pro-union policies, and the fact that it seemingly he's, as someone that has spent a lot of time working for the Conservative for this Conservative Party. I'm not even just talking the government wise. I'm worried as a Conservative for what the state of the actual the state of what the actual party is and our ability to be able to fight the next election. I think it's becoming more and more clear, at least to me and to Conservatives that I talk to. Aaron will not be that leader going into the election. I think the articles. I think there's been a whole series, and I know there's been chattering since the election in terms of people unhappy with his leadership. But I think that we've never seen the level of vitriol that we did in the Stephanie Levitt's piece and especially the Althea Raj piece in the Star over the course of the weekend. I lived through the Stockwell Day years. And that level of leaking and that level of detail and that level of vitriol coming out of the last caucus meeting were not stuff that actually started for Stock until after the DRC, after the party formally, after the 12 members of caucus actually formally split. That's when things got nasty. And so I think that for a whole host of reasons, I think the biggest disappointment is Aaron, the Conservative campaign, and where the state of the Conservative Party is currently.
You think we'll see a leadership in 2022?
I don't know. I don't think that someone, and you guys can tell me, when you have so many people in caucus willing to speak to a reporter and give such detailed accounts of what happened in caucus. And those were stuff that I had heard happen in caucus. And the one thing is, even a couple of the quotes weren't as terrible towards Aaron. But the one line that stood out to me was every single person that she spoke to said that they felt that it was an internal hit job on Shannon Stubbs. So even the people that are giving him the benefit of the doubt or saying maybe he should stay on feel that it was a political hit job. And if you're going to do something like that in politics, you don't fizzle out so spectacularly. Like you have to actually do the kill shot, because not doing that is devastating. And that's what we're seeing. That's what we're seeing in terms of the fallout of that.
It's nothing that winning wouldn't cure, right? Like, I mean, every party that's in opposition starts to have these internal issues and starts to factionalize and starts to just splinter. And it's very, very difficult. I mean, it's in opposition.
But the party was willing to. You had people that were upset internally about Bill 21. You had people extremely upset about the Conservative carbon tax, and people were willing to kind of hold their nose and run and not say anything. And it didn't work. So they're like, okay, Aaron, you're telling us that we're up in the polls internally. You're telling us you have this master plan. We think we hate these fucking policies, but we're willing to give you the benefit of the doubt because you're telling us you're taking us to the promised land. We're going to be back in government, and it failed spectacularly. So he does not have that benefit anymore. And all the polls that have come out since the election, even though the economy has now become a top of mind issue, and the Liberals are weak on it, and people are being severely affected by the cost of living, the price of gas. We are anywhere between not 8 or 9 and 5 points behind. And I think 6 polls that have come out in the last month.
And his favorables have fallen like a rock among Conservative voters.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
And look, I'll just add one more thing. David and I don't know much about the internal dynamics of the Conservative caucus right now, but we do know about these kinds of internal party struggles. And it's very tempting for people to try to say to themselves, don't get distracted by anonymous ankle biting in the newspapers. Don't exaggerate, don't let the tail wag the dog. But what that story by Theo Raj, right, what it tells you is that you were in a fight. And it tells you that people are fighting against you and they are going to throw ammo your way. And whether you like it or not, that story means you can't stop it. Like, it means you literally can't stop it. It means you can't say in caucus, guys, we can't have this. That's going to be the next story. Go into caucus, or somebody's calling around saying caucus, we can't do this. It's self-destructive and divisive. Don't do this. And then that gets reported against it. You can't stop it. The only way you can respond to it, and this is its significance, is you have to John Turner, 1986 it. It's just, and we've said this ourselves here many times, but he ultimately is only going to beat it by beating it. So he has to call the question, and he has to take those people on. And he has to say, listen, motherfuckers, meet me at 10 o'clock in front of the Esso station, and we're going to throw down. It's the only fucking way to deal with it.
He was better poised if he had done that right after the election. The damage that has happened since. Like, if you you read the reports on Bill C4, which Althea talked about, I think maybe Steph Lebitz talked about on her column as well. And we talked about it when it happened. I'm happy that the conversion therapy bill passed. I'm happy that it's done. I supported it the last time. I supported it this time. But if you remember when we talked about it, I said, this is great as long as whatever he communicated about how this was going to go through all three readings and be sent to the Senate right away was clear to caucus, and he didn't lie to caucus. And that is coming out. And so you can only do that. You can't do that as a leader. Like, lying is bad generally in life. Don't lie. It is absolutely a killer for politicians. And so I think Scott, he would have had a better time surviving a month and a half ago, right after the election, than what he does now. I think so much has happened internally in the last month that there's a reason they are afraid to call that. They're way too afraid to call that question.
Okay. Scott, what's your disappointment of the year?
Well, it's not Aaron O'Toole. I like him right where he fucking is. Mine is very contemporary. Mine is of the last few days, and it's inspired by the discussion you had with Andre Pratt and David. Because I've struggled with this question of Bill 21. I've struggled at it from obviously I loathe the legislation, and I'm terribly afraid of what it pretends and the strong support it has for it in Quebec. But I've struggled sort of trying to think about it as if I was in Ottawa right now, how would I advise the political leader? And, how do you manage this issue? Is it, how do you not object strenuously to something that's so unprincipled, but without, inflaming it? And I thought your discussion with Andre Pratt really brought one thing into focus with me. And what I heard Pratt say, which I thought was interesting, was you have to be worried about a bunch of English Canadian voices, and when they speak up, whether it can be easily translated into, we're just getting bullied. But he drew a circle around the Prime Minister and said, his name is Trudeau. He is a Quebecer. He is the Prime Minister. And he has standing and station that would allow him to say, I'm not just saying it's wrong, but I'm going to make the argument as to why it's wrong for the Quebec project. I'm going to make the argument as to why it's wrong for the Canadian project. And to do a full-throated argument with Quebecers and say, I may not mount, but it left me quite struck and thinking that, there is room for the Prime Minister, for a Prime Minister named Trudeau, for this Prime Minister Trudeau, to persuade a group of Quebecers, to lay the seeds at least of an argument that might have a longer term positive effect on how this debate unfolds from here. And so I would have to say, after struggling with what I would advise and what I would do if I were in Ottawa, I think my biggest disappointment is that the Prime Minister hasn't tackled this issue and seen it as an issue where he needs to get into the guerrilla Quebecers and say, I really would like to try to chart a different course and tell you what we could do differently here.
Now, not to sidebar, but do you think his comments earlier this week or last week on the notwithstanding clause was his was a tiptoe into this debate? He of course kind of echoed because it's his dad hated the notwithstanding clause, had no choice put it in the charter. And Trudeau kind of tiptoed into saying that it wasn't necessary. He wasn't a fan. So is this his tiptoe into what we can expect in terms of this debate?
I think so, and I want to be careful. Like, I don't want to be the jerk off English guy who just says, why doesn't Trudeau like show some backbone? And I'm not saying that. Like, I really struggle with the complexity of this issue and the dynamics of this issue and how dangerous it is and how you might very well start a bonfire by engaging on this thing. But I do think that he's edging into it. And I think the reason he's edging into it, Jenny, is because he has no choice. I think that it kind of comes. And so if you know that you're going to get into it, then I think you have to say more than I oppose it. I think you have to say to people, I want to sit down with you and reach across the armchair and go, for Pete's sake, this is why I think we can do this differently and how there's a different course. I think you have to have that dialogue. So I don't think it's an interview. I think it's a speech. I think it's
more than one
full-throated engagement. Yeah, I think you have to tackle it in a big way. And understand that it's a medium to long-term thing. Your point, David, about, well, we live in a world of instification, and if it doesn't immediately yield a result, well, then it doesn't mean anything. That's not actually so.
No, but he does have, because he is, as Andre Pratt said, part of the family. He has a unique opportunity to intervene in a constructive way and try to change opinion within that family. I remember something Donald MacDonald told me when I was asking him once if he was bitter about having been denied the leadership in 1980 by Trudeau's return. And he said no, because in retrospect, I would probably have lost the referendum had I been the prime minister. And Joe Clark would probably have lost the referendum had he been the prime minister. And only Pierre Trudeau could have persuaded Quebecers to do that. And he did it with argument and speeches and major interventions that changed the thinking of Quebecers. So it's possible.
What's yours?
Okay. My biggest disappointment, because I'm such a nerd, my biggest disappointment was the federal budget. I mean, Jenny smiles because she knows how much I love budgets and how important I think they are. But listen, this is a country, I think, and I have economist after economist come on the hurly-burly and talk to me. This is a country that badly needs an industrial strategy. Some of the basic underpinnings of our economy are getting kicked out from under us. And you look down the future, and absent government strategy and intervention, it's hard to see a more prosperous Canada 20 years from now than it is today. Especially with the decline of oil and gas activity that will occur over that period of time. And secondly, the pandemic exposed to us, all kinds of social fissures and gaps in our system that need to be addressed. I thought Chrystia Freeland and Michael Sabia were a very exciting duo, and I have not written them off at all, but I thought they were a very exciting duo to tackle those challenges. But the last budget didn't have a strategy. It had childcare, which is hugely important, and somewhat of an economic lever. But with respect to the rest of it, I don't have a sense that anybody in Ottawa knows more than I do about where jobs and growth in the future are going to come from. And when people get asked questions, they still refer to the supercluster program, which is A, 2 terms old, and B, largely failed. So I'm looking for more thinking about, and they had raised such hopes and expectations when they prorogued to plan the throne speech, and there was a lot of signals that some big thinking was coming, and then it wasn't there. So that's my disappointment of the year. Okay, that's all you've got to say to that? Just K?
I want to just keep it to K now because we have a later category where I'm going to expand upon this. And I know that Jenny only has so much tolerance for us wanking off about, political policy that's absent of, political strategy that's absent of economic policy is going to fail. And you're like, back in the day when we were around the CMO table. So I'll save it for later. But I agree with you.
Okay, so start with you. Quote of the year. Best quote of the year.
Who's you?
You.
Me is you. I got it. This is an Abbott and Costello sketch. All right, best quote of the year. Okay, here it is. Jenny, just fortify yourself. Quote, I will say their names tonight in front of the people of Canada. Jane Philpott, Jody Wilson-Raybould, Selena Cesar, Siobhan. I thought that line in the, when we were watching the federal leaders debate, which was, a real Muppet movie of a political event, I thought, a real travesty. But when Enemy Paul... rodeo. Yeah. When Enemy Paul wheeled on the Prime Minister and said that line, I thought to myself, my God, that is like, I couldn't help but feel like, imagine myself being him and just thinking to yourself, fuck, did a trapdoor just open underneath me? Like, am I still on the stage? Did Blofeld just like burst me into fire? Like, I just thought it was, now it didn't, at the end of the day, it didn't carry the debate. At the end of the day, their internal problems were so profound that they couldn't get lift off. But as a single line, as a political punch right to the gut, holy smokes, it was devastating. And I remember almost falling off my chair watching it live on TV.
And it turns out she wrote it herself with her husband and her children.
Yeah, such is the infrastructure of that.
Right? Jesus. Jenny, what's your quote of the year?
I actually kind of be more lighthearted. I think that was a good. Line by her during the debate. I get a kick out of watching Blanchette, especially when he's when
George
it's not
C. Chickenhawk.
when it's not the translation, when he's actually speaking in English. And I thought his response to the speech from the throne, there were a couple lines that I remember watching it and laughing out loud when he said, this could have been written by a college student, and very serious, because when he delivers these lines, he's not trying to be funny. He's being very serious. I think the line that made me laugh the most, though, because of course he being unhappy, of course, with Mary Simon's appointment, we were not to say we are supporting it is wrong. We will live with this empty piece of paper gently read in 3 languages.
No, he is quick-witted.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's very quick-witted. My best quote of the year, Trudeau, after the election, you are sending us back to work with a clear mandate to get Canada through this pandemic. I think it's the best summary of the mood by the end of the campaign that there could be, which was nobody felt that there was a choice on offer. Nobody felt that there was a direction they wanted to choose. Nobody felt that they wanted to give a mandate to anybody. And it was just, this whole exercise has been a waste of time. And let's just get the government back to work solving the major problem facing the country. And I think that, unfortunately, they didn't really do that. They didn't follow that advice. They disappeared for months after saying that. But I think that was the best understanding of the mood of Canada at the end of the election, which is, oh, fuck all this bullshit. Just go back to work. Do your job. Okay. Worst quote of the year. Jenny.
My turn to start? Okay. So, I think Tiff Macklin saying that inflation is transitory could be one of them. But I actually think the worst one was Trudeau's response regarding the economy. His response was, when I think about the biggest, most important economic policy this government, if reelected, would move forward, you'll forgive me if I don't think about monetary policy. You'll understand that I think about families. What the fuck does that even mean? So I think that those are the kind of quotes that people watch. Those are the kind of breathy statements that he makes that do eat at his credibility and gives an opening for the opposition to be able to go after him on. Gives a reason for the media to go after him on. You just had the Prime Minister, who was asked about economic policy, say, "I don't think about monetary policy." How is that even possible? And so I think that Trudeau's quote, that quote, is the worst quote of the year.
It's a bad one. Scott, do you have any thoughts on that quote?
Yeah, I mean, it touches on the broad issues that you and I talk about all the time, David, in particular. I understand why Jenni dislikes it. I dislike it because of the reason
There's
you
a
just spoke
faux
about.
populism to it, right?
There's a faux populism to it, but I dislike it because it shows. I don't think it would be that bad a quote. I think it'd be a quote you could shrug off if people saw you championing an economic plan that was clear. The reason it hits is that it's the most he's said about economic policy. So it bugs me.
All right. What's your worst quote?
Best summer ever. I think it's devastating. I mean, I don't even know how we can have a competition. And I'm sorry, Jenni, I know you love Jason. I don't dislike Jason personally. I quite like him personally. But I just don't know that there's... Best summer ever is just devastating, man. It's just devastating. And I think, it in precise terms, it captures all the challenges that Jason's having. And I think in broad terms, it speaks to something you sort of touched on earlier in the campaign, David, which is a really clumsy, uncertain, awkward relationship that conservatives across the country have had with the management of the pandemic and COVID, wanting it to be over, wanting to diminish it, wanting to dismiss it, and hating having to deal with it, and therefore leaving people with the impression that they're less motivated to deal with it. And I just think it's I think it's an impressionistic thing that's very dangerous. So I think best summer ever was like it's a bumper sticker monster of a quote.
Why do you two think that? Building off that quote, why do you think that governments have felt the need to be able to tell people when it's going to be over? Why do they keep sort of signaling that they know where the light at the end of the tunnel is when nobody does know?
Because they need to give a light at the end of the tunnel. The problem is no one is believing them anymore. And I think you can see the difference in terms of campaigns. Of when New Brunswick, Saskatchewan, and BC went, you had governments elected in two cases went from minorities to majorities, because at that point we were hopeful. We kept being told that our way out of this was vaccines. Once 70% of us or 75% of us are vaccinated, we'll be out. Vaccines were on the horizon. Everything was great. Freeland a couple months ago, by Christmas, we're going to be out of this, because people need hope. Now the problem politicians are going to have, which is take away Legault in a different category. We saw what happened in Nova Scotia. We saw what happened with Trudeau. Like he should have won his majority. He got a minority. It'll be interesting to watch, because you've got two of the biggest provinces. Doug's going to be facing re-election in June, Legault in October. Do people have the same hope? Because right now we're all sitting here, and I don't want to get into a COVID talk. We're all sitting here where the absolute clown show of messaging that was coming out of medical officials, especially here in Ontario, in the last 24 hours are vaccines really don't work. Everyone's equally contagious. And oh, by the way, we think rapid tests don't work. And so I think people have been wanting to give hope, because everyone wants to get out of this. The problem is they're actually running out of any credibility or runway in terms of being able to say that. Like, I think that has to. I think politicians have to make the calculation that they can't make any promises on this.
Yeah.
Take away COVID. Just one more beat on this, because I am also sympathetic to people that make this mistake, because I've made this mistake and I've advised people and watch them make the mistake based on that advice. And it is this tension that you always feel when confronted with a challenge, to point out hope and to create an expectation. And so there's always this tension in politics, and a lot of it has to do with where you are and where things are headed, as to whether you can pull it off, where you want to be aspirational and inspirational and say, look, here is like something that will rally us together, make us feel better, and you'll often hear from people, don't do that. Jesus Christ, you're just setting up an expectation you can't meet. And sometimes you get bit in the ass on that. But sometimes you don't. Sometimes it's yes, we can. And, you come out of nowhere and you overtake Hillary Clinton in the primaries and you win the general election. And you're the president of the United States. And sometimes it's making history for us. and we got our ears boxed, right? And, and then sometimes it's best summer ever and mission accomplished. And you feel it almost immediately that it was a barn-sized mistake.
Okay. My worst quote of the year goes to Premier Ford, talking about the skilled labor shortage in Ontario, when he said, "You come here like any other new Canadian, you work your tail off." Ford said, "If you think you're coming to collect the dole and sit around, it's not going to happen. Go somewhere else." It's just the worst kind of pandering. There's no reason to imply that immigrants are looking to come here and get on the dole and sit around. That's not the evidence of what they do, and he knows that. And it's just it's a way of pandering to voters that have that point of view, and it's obviously unhelpful.
Listen, we talked about this when it happened. I think people took that quote out of context, having worked with Doug, knowing Doug. And I'll be honest, the voter coalition of Ford Nation, especially in the heart of Etobicoke and Scarborough, where Rob Ford, won his mayoral campaign in 2010, where Doug did well against Tory in 2014, is one of the most diverse coalitions that I've ever worked with. When you're on the ground door knocking or at events, it is extremely multicultural. It's extremely diverse. Doug has a way of speaking, and I think that quote was completely taken out of context.
Right. Nonetheless, I think it'll still be used against him.
Sure will. And to your point, because I agree with you, I watched the Ford coalition. I've seen that voter coalition. I know that it is diverse. And I know that both Rob and he have found a way to tap into those communities and connect with those communities. That's impressive. But I think that's why it makes it even more objectionable, because it wasn't even on strategy form. It was just a reflex bullshit thing. So I hated it.
All right. Our next category, most valuable political journalist. I'll start.
Why did you include this category? You're just trying to get us hated.
I know. I know. By everybody, journalists, listeners, viewers, everybody. Most valuable political journalist. There are lots to choose from. There are lots of people at the Toronto Star that are doing great work, especially on both federal and provincial politics, covering that and unearthing it. Lots of people at the CBC I'm paying attention to. But day in and day out, Bob Fife and Stephen Chase are breaking stories. They are breaking stories. They broke this Dominic Barton story now. And so, in terms of learning things I might otherwise not have known, I think those two people are doing, and I use them as one because they're writing together, those two people are doing it more often than anybody else. And the government hates them, and Liberals think they're unfair. And I certainly felt that way when we were in office about Bob Fife as well. But I suspect that Conservatives feel it when they're in office and Bob Fife is writing. So I think that it's often torqued. It's often at the bleeding edge of what the story can sustain. But in terms of digging up new stuff and breaking stories, those are my valuable journalists of the year.
Do you want me to go next?
Sure.
So listen, I think, like you said, I think there are some great, there's some great journalists out there. But I think what's interesting to watch is the kind of new generation, the new, newer people, a couple in the alternative media side, and then in the mainstream side, this generational change of these young women that are coming up and kind of leading the charge at the gallery. Like you have, like in the alternative meeting, you have Candace Malcolm from True North. You've got Holly Doan from Blacklocks. Blacklocks has a very niche. They talk about economic policies, and they've broken a lot of stories in the last year. You have Fife, who has a team of young women that work with him at the Globe. Christy Kirkup, Marika Walsh, Laura Stone, who's going on mat leave in Ontario, and then you have now the Star. The two main political reporters are also Stephanie Levitz and Althea Raj. And so I think you've seen this generational shift of women that are taking a much more prominence in the gallery than what has happened in previous iterations.
So I can be quick because I'm going to sound like I'm bridging both of you. So a couple things, 2 honorable mentions from my part, and first speaks directly to what Jenni was saying. Marika Walsh. I just think we came to know her in Ontario, David. She's working for the Globe now in Ottawa. I just think she's crazy smart, good writer, unbelievably tenacious reporter, and of that crop that you're talking about young women and stuff. And I don't mean this to sideline anyone else because there's some huge talent, but I think Marika is just cream of the crop and is going to dominate for a long time. Second,
very good.
Heather Scalfield. I think that her column in the Star, she's writing about politics and economics. She writes really good stuff. I personally feel like she's become absolute must read for me. Like I just, she's right in the wheelhouse of the stuff that interests me. And I think she's smart and fair and interesting and insightful. And she's been around for a while. And I've known her for a long time. And I really like this perch that she's landed on of writing about politics and economics together. But David, I'm with you, man. Like when I was going over this last night, I'm like, I don't know, maybe it's because I'm a 53-year-old who hung around Ottawa for 30 years. But like, I think it's still Fife. It's still Fife. Fuck, man. And the reason that he breaks so many stories is that if you have a story you want to break, the culture of Ottawa is you go to Fife. Like, I think that's, and that's been true where he was. And it used to drive me crazy when I worked, when I worked in the PMO or even when I was in finance, I'd be like, when he was at the National Post, the front page of the National Post every day would dictate your day, right? And it might be unbelievably torqued to be like, moon explodes. And then the next day it would be like, moon magically knit back together and replaced in our sky. And you'd be like, fuck, isn't anybody following this? Come on, these things can't be true. But, Bob is tenacious. I think he's turned into this unbelievable school teacher. I think he's just turned. I think he's. You mentioned that all the young people that he's working with, Jenni. You talk to people. I mean, there's a whole generation. He sort of slipped into this kind of role of he's still breaking stories. He's still running for the front page. He's still got a lead that has got a butcher sharp edge on it. But he's also sort of turned this thing into. He's just building this crop of young reporters. So it's pretty impressive. It's pretty damned impressive.
That's going to get us in trouble, Scott. People are
I know.
about that. Yeah.
I know.
Okay. Worst innovation in Canadian politics. Scott, you want to go first?
Sure. I had a whole bunch of stuff. I had a whole bunch of things because, as Jenni said, this has been such a shit year in so many ways, But I think that, and there's the conservative studio, which I hated, and then people thought was great for a while, and now they don't think it's great. But a bunch of stuff, and I don't know if this technically qualifies, David. Maybe you'll have to declare it out of bounds. But I think the worst innovation in Canadian politics is this kind of institutionalization, this settling in that we've accepted that high 20s, low 30s is like an acceptable place for the leading political parties to be at. And that the name of the game is use data, use micro-targeting, use digital tools in order to identify, marshal, and extract your vote, and so that you might be able to pull out, even like depending upon how the leaves fall from the maple tree, you might even pull out a majority government with 34 or 35%, and that's the name of the game now. And so we end up in a world where we go, well, minority government, but Trudeau's in a really strong position, and he's sitting at 32%. I would have been in a fucking sweat panic if we'd been at 32%, and it just seems like. Maybe it's because we've had so many minority governments and it's harder and harder to consolidate votes, and Quebec is a tougher and tougher nut to crack, and will only get tougher with Legault. But I just think, man, like you got to be in a 37-40 game, and instead of trying to figure out how do you get maximum gas out of 33 and 34%, like I wish that the innovation was focused on how do we get back to 41%, and how do you expand that coalition. So I know I sound like an old man screaming at clouds, but that's my pick.
No, I agree with you. I sure hope that the people that are thinking about the futures of the Conservative and Liberal parties are thinking about how they get 40 points. Because I think that's what a brokerage centrist party needs to get, and I think that that's the kind of consensus at a minimum you need in the country around a majority government. So, Jenni, what is your worst innovation of the year?
I'll kind of take off from where Scott said about the studio. I think a lot of the virtual stuff, like We're now going back to virtual question period. We're going back to virtual committees. Basically, every other country in the world has figured out how to keep meeting in person. You see, the Americans are pretty much fully back to normal. You see some of them wearing masks. Some not. You see the UK. Whenever there's a question period, there's less people in the house. But they figured out ways to come back, and I think that it is not what. This is not something that we should go back to. I think we're going to end up back to it in the next 6 months. It's really easy for the government. It makes things a lot easier than having to stand up in the House or being face to face on committee. But I think it's an absolutely terrible innovation, and we are seemingly the only country in the world that is still doing this.
I don't think there's any doubt it affects accountability. It affects the effectiveness of question period, for sure. And you know what, the accountability thing, in terms of my interviews over the course of the past year, Dennis Dawson pointing out to me how much it changes caucus meetings to have them virtually rather than in person, and how much less accountability there is on the part of the executive branch at caucus because of these virtual settings. It was, I thought, really interesting and something I've thought about a lot since then. My worst innovation of the year in politics is TikTok.
And we are deep into the old man stuff now.
we are gray hair and all that. Come on, fuck. This is the ultimate dumbing down of politics. How do you communicate anything meaningful? And listen, Singh is allegedly good at TikTok. He used it a lot. I think it symbolized the dumbing down of the NDP campaign. And, it's hard enough through digital media where you've got a few seconds of people's attention and maybe the sound's on or off to communicate ideas. But TikTok is another level altogether.
David and I, we like Bob Fife. We want to talk about economics, and people ought to be campaigning with hand-colored posters. Let's stop modernity.
Well, how do you like my JFK poster, my Bernie Taupin guitar, and my Beatles album on the back behind me there?
Hey,
I
boomer.
think they look great, and I've got Elton John who needs to go on the wall at some point back there behind me.
I'm covered in Jack Kirby in 1963. So
I have no problem with innovation, and I would have no problem with TikTok, but it wasn't effective for Singh. Like, they picked up one seat, so I think probably if we watch, we'll probably see continued social media innovation on this stuff, but it's got to be stuff that actually works. Just having someone look at something and say that's kind of cool, or isn't Jagmeet Singh cool? It doesn't necessarily translate into any issues or reasons that people are going to vote for him.
Totally. How do you make an argument? How do you make an argument?
He's a cool guy who dresses really nice.
All right. Our last topic. Thing I'm looking forward to in 2022. Who wants to go first?
Well, listen, I am looking forward to what I think eventually. I think that people, I don't want to get into COVID, but there is going to be an eventual reckoning with politicians and the medical officers and doctors who have been advising the country, advising the provinces, advising the municipalities, and spending billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars. And so I truly believe there are a lot of, we're still a healthcare system, the doctors tell us, are on a brink of collapse all the time, even though in terms of COVID patients, there are less people in ICUs now than what we had even in September. And so I think that there has to be, in the next year, there has to be some form of accountability in terms of the decisions that were made, simply because generations and generations past us, we will be long gone in the ground by the time we end up paying off or paying for these decisions. And I think there has to be some form of accountability for them.
Got it. Mine, Scott, to leave you to last. thing I'm looking forward to in 2022, the Ontario Provincial election. It's going to be fun to watch. There's 3 parties that could win it. All the parties have some of their best political people working on these campaigns. And God knows we're going to be around to cover it. Maybe we'll go daily. Like we did in the federal. And
Right
it's going to be a big show. It's going to be an exciting show. It's going to be dramatic. And there's 2 big elections this year, the Quebec being the other one. But the Quebec one looks like a foregone conclusion. But Ontario looks like it's going to be interesting as hell. So I'm looking forward to the Ontario election.
I agree with that. There's a bunch of things I'm looking forward to because, as you know, I'm such a cheerful, optimistic, and forward-looking person. Obviously, I want a new coach in Montreal, and I want a team that can score more than 1.3 goals per fucking week. I just want regime change. But, I think if there's one thing...
Hey, you know who the leading scorer on the Montreal Canadiens
was? It Hoffman?
Well, if he was on the team, just Barry Kotkaniemi would be the leading goal scorer on the Montreal Canadiens.
Jesus Christ, that's great. I don't know. People, it's a good thing we left the Habs talk to the end so that people don't turn off. But no, you know what? I'm gonna shift jurisdictions on you guys. Mine's also an election. I can't wait for the Ontario election. I'm gonna have a ball with that. I know, but I'm looking forward to the midterms in the States, and I'm looking forward to it for this very specific reason. First of all, I love American politics. It's just such a blast, and it's such an exciting, dangerous, and consequential time there. But I'm looking forward to it for this specific reason. I think that Biden is really ineffectual. I think that his vice president has not stepped up as the putative front runner to lead the Democrats and to be like somebody that's marshaling excitement behind him. I think that they are in crisis, and I want this midterms to happen. I want it to be the kind of event that causes the Democratic Party to say to itself, Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. We had better pull our shit together because Trump is going to seize the White House back in 2024, and what we know is that will decay and destroy respect for institutions and rule of law and an America that returns to Trump willingly, because the Democratic parties can't find a way to organize themselves internally, establish coherence, and make a middle-class pitch. That is not just dangerous for the United States, it's dangerous for the world, and we are on top of the United States, and it's super dangerous for us. And so I really hope that the midterms light an absolute crisis up in the Democratic Party and force them to make changes that only crisis does. And they're in stronger shape in 2024 because there's a lot at stake about keeping Trump out of the White House.
Hear, hear. Hear, hear. Jenny just shakes her head. We're so emotional, aren't we?
You guys are just so fucking emotional on this. I'm looking forward.
Burn the fucking world down.
I'm looking forward to the midterms too.
What's your thing you're looking forward to in this year?
I already did mine.
Oh, Christ.
I went on the retribution.
Jesus. We're looking forward to David spending more time at the home. It's his memory. Here, David. This tea should strengthen your memory. And this meal will keep your bones dense and strong. You're coming along, buddy. Don't worry.
This hosting job is harder than it looks.
I'm sure.
There's
this sitting talking shit job is harder than it looks.
All right. So, hey, yous. Who's got one?
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
Right.
Well, yeah, I was toying, as I said, whether to,
It's our last Hey You of the year, Jenny.
I know. So whether to rant about the Conservative Party or COVID, that's been done. I think those are probably two of my biggest topics of Hey Yous for the last year. Of course, Happy New Year to everyone. But you said something, David, that triggered it more of a finite issue in terms of Hey You, when you mentioned Fife and Chase breaking the Dominic Barton story. And I have been one, as you know, I am all for the Conservatives having there being a one-trick pony in terms of talking about the cost of living and price of gas and inflation. But I think I will say this issue is a caveat. If I were the Conservatives, if I was the opposition, I would be going hard at the Liberals in committees on this, in terms of ethics committee, because this is a guy who has broke the conflict of interest guidelines. I don't care that ambassadors have to spend 1 year and not have any jobs with people that they would have dealt with directly. It's not like it's even a year. It's not like it's 6 months. He's still in the job. He is still currently our ambassador to China. And I think that there is so much taint regarding his job at Rio Tinto, and the fact that he held meetings with them, and the fact that although they're Australian based, the 50% of their business is in China, along with his position. Including, pushing, increased investment between Canada and Beijing. I think it stinks. And if I am the opposition, I am going to go hard on the Liberals and hard on Dominic Barton coming back. I think it's a very good non-political or non-economy story for the opposition to jump on.
I think it's a story. That's for sure. It's not the first ambassador to do it either. Scott, what's your Hey You?
I think I have a boring Hey You. It sort of reaches out of, but I feel it strongly, and I know you probably do too, David, and I think you do too, Jenny, actually. And that's that I hope, as you take a look at the political spectrum and the position right now where the government's at, I'm going to talk principally about the government and the Liberal Party. You sort of say, well, how do we get to majority territory? What is the path? So we got to get out of COVID, and then we got to manage economic growth, and we got to manage economic challenge. And I just think, there's challenges with Quebec, Bill 21. There's all sorts of complications. Massive transition is going to have to happen in energy producing provinces while not turning our back on those people and those industries. And how do we manage all those things? So enormous challenges. But I just think from my perspective, my Hey You is to the Prime Minister and to Freeland. Make economic management your obsession for this next year. Win that issue, win economic management, get us in a place where you are seen to be the most effective communicators and the most effective managers, the most effective leaders on economic issues. Because I think that's going to be, as we come out of Omicron and, hopefully that takes us out of COVID on a more sustaining basis, that's going to be the ball game, man. And that's the path to better outcomes, and that's a path to a better political outcome. And whenever the next election happens, and it could happen at any point because we're in a minority, I think the person that has their hand on the economic levers is going to be the person that becomes Prime Minister. And I think it's a Liberals' best chance to put themselves in majority territory.
Yep, couldn't agree more with that one. My Hey You goes out to the Government of Canada. And something that I haven't heard nearly enough about recently, maybe my own fault, but I haven't heard much about it, is the attempts to get vaccines into the developing world and the poor nations that can't afford the vaccine programs we've had. I'm saying this from a purely selfish point of view. I do not want to spend the next couple of years sitting around waiting for the next variant to come out of somewhere that has adapted and evolved past our vaccines and all this. And it seems evident that that's going to happen until we stamp this thing out to some degree. And so I would like the Canadian government to use whatever levers it can and whatever influence it can to get that international vaccine program going. I presume that Pfizer and Moderna have now made enough off of their patents that that we can genericize that, because we shouldn't pay Pfizer's rates to vaccinate the entire world. So let's get going on that, for our own safety, if for no other reason. That's our show, folks. That's the last Curse of Politics of the year.
That's our year.
Jenny, say Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Happy New Year.
Scott.
Merry Christmas. Happy New Year.
Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. Happy holidays to everybody who's celebrating. Thank you, TELUS and CN Rail, for all your support over the course of the past year. And Herle Burleyites, Curse of Politicsites, you accursed. Thank you for your loyalty and for listening. And we'll try to be sharp and interesting and funny in 2022. Because, to make up for 2021, obviously.
We got some ground to cover.
So everybody, enjoy your holidays. We'll be back in January. Curse of Politics.